Welcome to Organic Christian Life. In this episode, we will discuss how to read and understand the Bible. Perhaps you may be thinking this sounds boring, but the perspectives presented here are not the same old Christian cliches. Some ideas we will talk about are not typically taught in most churches. The purpose of this episode is to bring enlightenment and transformation through learning. The first item of note is that it is largely a book of history that is filled with valuable life lessons. It is also a book filled with divine inspiration, a book where theology is drawn from and shaped, a book that contains prophecies and the fulfillment of those prophecies many years later, a book that provides a look into a past culture along with all the richness and traditions of that culture. First things first, before there was a Bible, there was God who created all things. God created the earth, animals, and humans. God would visit with the first humans, Adam and Eve. They had daily conversations. They had relationship. This is important to note because God designed all of us to have conversational relationship with Him on a daily and moment-to-moment basis. Therefore, it is safe to say that God did not intend for humans to have a relationship with the Bible itself per se. So why have a Bible? Well, for one, it is a record of various ways God interacted with people throughout history. However, it is also a record of the very thoughts of God as people were divinely inspired to write down what God had revealed to them. One area that is problematic is that these thoughts were written thousands of years ago in languages that do not always translate into English precisely. Therefore, it is imperative that we consider original language as a part of how to read and understand the Bible. To keep it simple, we could say that the Old Testament was written in Hebrew and the New Testament was written in Greek. Obviously, it is a bit more complex than that, but this is a good general rule to follow. The reader needs to become familiar with the fact that ancient Hebrew is a picture-oriented language that has many nuances. Furthermore, to fully understand these ancient stories, one would need to access what is known as Paleo-Hebrew. However, for the common person, a concordance will suffice in getting closer to the actual meaning and usage of Hebrew words. Here is an example of a Bible passage that has been poorly translated from Hebrew into English. Isaiah chapter 40 and verse 31. They that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. Some translations say, those who wait will gain new strength. How would waiting make one stronger? This seems to make no sense in the way we think about waiting. So, picture going to a busy restaurant. You might ask, how long is the wait to get a table? Sometimes too long, right? But this word wait in Isaiah does not mean to sit around and wait. Oh no, not at all. This Hebrew word for wait in the passage is kava, and it means intertwine, as in twisting and binding. It is a word mainly used in making a rope. We can also picture a vine that is twisted and binding to a tree. Remember, the Hebrew language is one of imagery. So can you see how the English word wait is inadequate in its description? The thought being communicated here is when a person intertwines themselves with God. They gain strength. Can you see how someone would miss that message entirely if they were not aware of original language? Now, this is merely one example of hundreds that we could find where knowing original language and meaning helps with our understanding and proper application. Let's take a look at the New Testament. The English word for life is derived from three different Greek words. They are bios, meaning biology, psuche, meaning mind, and zoe, meaning the life of God. So when we read the word life, we need clarification as to what term it is referring to. Making that distinction becomes helpful in our understanding and application. Consider John 14:2. In my Father's house there are many mansions. The words used here have created a belief that when we go to heaven, there will be a mansion waiting for us to move into. A mansion specifically designed for us according to our works done here on earth. This false notion is based on an incorrect translation. The Greek actually reads, "In my Father's household there are many rooms." The message being conveyed by Jesus was that anyone with a genuine faith will not be left outside. There will be a place prepared for them in the heavenly community. It is likely Jesus was referring to a type of housing complex well known in that region. Archaeological evidence supports this. So, no, we do not get a literal mansion when we die. But notice how we have assigned a meaning to this passage that simply is not there. I have noticed three areas that cause people to do this. We already mentioned language. The other two are culture and context. When it comes to reading the Bible, this is huge. Traditionally, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are considered to be the start of the New Testament. Technically, though, the New Testament starts after the death of Jesus on the cross. Stick with me and track along as we consider this viewpoint. Take a look at the book of Hebrews chapter 9 and verses 16 to 17. For where there is a will and testament involved, the death of the one who made it must be established, for a will and testament takes effect at death, since it is never in force as long as the one who made it is alive. This fact is overlooked by so many, but it is oh so important. Why? Because some of what Jesus said is only pertinent and relevant to the people alive at that time. This may be a new concept for some, but take time to think this through. The Levitical priesthood, the ways of Moses, the centralized Jewish temple, and all the elements that came with that were still in existence when Jesus was speaking, teaching, and healing the sick. Therefore, Jesus himself had to honor the covenant that was in force at that time. The New Testament or covenant could not be applied yet. That would require a death of the one making the covenant. There are many ways to consider how this looks for us today. For example, my wife and I have a legal will prepared by an attorney. Our last will and testament only becomes effective upon our death. Should we need a new will drawn up for some reason, the previous will, testament, covenant is no longer applied. The new one supersedes and replaces the old one, but again, only upon the death of the one who created it. This viewpoint of not mixing the two covenants together into some kind of religious stew will help us to understand the Bible better. I call this covenant thinking. Covenant is not a term we often use in a Western society, so to place it in simple terms, when reading the Bible, ask this question: how do I interpret this verse or verses in light of what Jesus did on the cross? And what covenant am I walking in? Covenant is not a term we use much in a Western society, so to keep it simple, think about it like this. When reading the Bible, how do I see, understand, and interpret what I just read in light of what Jesus did on the cross? A common mistake many people make is to take passages from the Old Covenant and try to make them fit into the framework of the New Covenant. As Christians, we longer live in the Old Covenant. Let us consider three components that will further our learning. They are customs, culture, and context. Let's start with the last one on our list: context. This is huge. Everything we read must be placed in a context for proper understanding and proper application. This includes reading an entire chapter and/or chapters that surround a particular verse. Here is an example that encompasses all three components. Hebrews chapter 10 and verse 25. Forsake not the assembling of yourselves, as is the manner of some. This one verse has been taken out of context for hundreds of years by the vast majority of churches. It has often been used to condemn people who do not faithfully attend Sunday morning church service. The question then becomes this: does anyone take the time to consider what assembling of yourselves looked like at the time this letter to the Hebrews was written? The idea of church buildings and various denominations was not in existence at this time. How then can we tell how the early church met together? We can look at other verses for one. This will help in discovering the customs and culture they practiced. A rather big clue comes from the Apostle Paul himself, as found in the book of Acts, chapter 20 and verse 20. It reads, "How I kept back nothing that was profitable to you, but have shown you and have taught you publicly and from house to house." It stands to reason that because Paul went house to house to teach, that the early church largely gathered together in houses. This is also established in the book of Acts 9 more times, as it lists various houses they met at. House churches are mentioned in the book of Romans and Corinthians and Colossians and Philemon. Therefore, it is safe to conclude that not forsaking the assembling of yourselves together was understood at that time to mean simple fellowship at other believers' houses. One could do this today and not attend a Sunday morning service, and yet still fulfill this call to gather. Can you see that? Does that mean the structured church has no place or value? Far from the truth. There is definite benefit from being a part of a church body that meets in a building. The distinction we are making is the understanding and application of this one verse in our times. We are pointing out the importance of context, customs, and culture as it pertains to reading the Bible. It is worth noting that Paul did mention he taught publicly. Again, what did that look like to them? The Jewish temple was still standing at this time. It had the holy place, the inner court, and the outer courtyard. It is probable that Paul spoke openly in the social marketplace of the outer courtyard. It is also probable that Paul spoke at Greek and Roman venues as well. It is not possible at all that Paul spoke at a church building from a pulpit or stage such as we have today. So if a pastor uses this verse to urge people to attend church faithfully, that pastor would benefit from listening to this podcast. This begs the question: how many other verses from the Bible are we misunderstanding? Probably a lot. But now we have some tools we can use to help guide us. A tool I found to be of great help as a young believer was a book called Manners and Customs of Bible Lands. It is amazing how much we miss by not being familiar with how the Jewish people spoke and the customs they had. This may be the start of a whole new journey of discovery for you. It was quite a shift for me as the years passed to realize how many lessons I had to unlearn and relearn in order to grow and mature in faith, especially when it came to reading the Bible. The Bible as we know it did not exist for hundreds of years once the early church began. I often wonder how believers did what they did without a Bible. Maybe they had faith in the God of the Bible rather than the Bible itself. One last thought to consider is how many versions of the Bible exist. My advice would be to not get caught up in divisive and confusing differences. It should be noted that at the time Jesus lived, Aramaic was largely spoken, as well as Hebrew and Greek. In 382 AD, a Latin version of the Scriptures was made. We do not find an English version until 1382. King James commissioned a Bible in 1604. King James admired the work of Shakespeare and wanted this version of the Bible to be in such prose. Believe it or not, Jesus did not speak in Old Elizabethan English, nor did Moses speak that way, or anyone in the Bible. What version you use is not of significance. What matters the most is when you read the Bible, ensure that it brings you and others into freedom and not bondage. Capture the spirit of the word more than the letter of the law, for the letter kills, but the spirit brings life. In other words, be a Bible that others can read by how you conduct your life and how you treat others. Be a living epistle.
Thank you for listening. You can find us on Facebook, Organic Christian Life. We also have a YouTube channel by the same name, so be sure to check them out and have a very blessed day.